You're sitting next to a campfire. It is late. Smoke drifts toward your face and you breathe it in. Not on purpose, just because you're there and the wind shifted. Congratulations, you just reenacted one of the oldest human behaviors on record. Not cooking, not storytelling, not even sex. Breathing in smoke. And here is the strange part. About 12,300 years ago, a hunter-gatherer in what is now the Utah desert sat beside a fire, not so different from yours. No camping chair, no marshmallows, no concept of lung cancer, but he wasn't just keeping warm. He was sitting in the smoke on purpose because it made him feel something he wanted to feel again. That was before agriculture, before pottery, before anyone on this planet had planted a single grain of wheat. How were humans using tobacco before they even learned to farm? Who was the first person to deliberately breathe in smoke? And why, out of everything the natural world had to offer, did humans become obsessed with it? When most people hear the word smoking, they picture a cigarette, maybe a cigar, maybe a peace pipe, if they're feeling generous with their history. And the default origin story goes something like this. Indigenous peoples in the Americas used tobacco. Columbus showed up around 1492, brought it back to Europe. Everybody got hooked, and the rest is cancer statistics and warning labels. That story isn't wrong, but it is dramatically incomplete. In 2021, archaeologists working at a site called Wishbone in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert found 4 charred seeds of wild tobacco inside an ancient hearth. Radiocarbon dating put that fire at approximately 12,300 years old. The previous oldest evidence of tobacco use, a smoking pipe found in Alabama, dated to roughly 3,300 years ago. This single discovery pushed the timeline back by about 9,000 years. Let that sit for a second. 9,000 years. But here is the thing that matters more than the date. Tobacco is not the beginning of this story. It is not even the main character. The real story is about something much older, much simpler, and much harder to quit. Smoke itself, and this is where the evidence starts to get strange. Because the Wishbone discovery is not the only ancient proof that humans deliberately sought out psychoactive smoke. Something else was happening on the other side of the world. Thousands of miles from Utah, high in the Pamir Mountains of western China, archaeologists excavated a 2,500-year-old burial ground called Jerzankal Cemetery. Inside the tombs, they found small wooden braziers, carved bowls filled with stones that showed heavy burn marks. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute ran chemical analysis on the residue. What they found was cannabis, and not just any cannabis. Varieties with unusually high concentrations of THC, the compound responsible for the psychoactive effects. The site sits over 3,000 meters above sea level, where intense UV radiation pushes cannabis plants to produce more THC. These mourners were, to use a technical term, getting genuinely high at funerals. These were not cooking implements. These were drug delivery devices, buried alongside the dead. And here is the detail that really gets you. The braziers were concentrated in the more elaborate tombs. The ones with silk from eastern China and glass beads from western Asia, the elites. The people at the top of that society were the ones getting high, and they wanted to keep getting high in the afterlife. That is not casual use. That is devotion. And if you go further back, to roughly 450 BCE, you find the Greek historian Herodotus. He described a ceremony practiced by the Scythians, nomadic warriors who roamed the Central Asian steppes. After burying their dead, the Scythians would build small tents from felt, crawl inside, throw cannabis onto red-hot stones, and inhale the fumes. Herodotus, clearly a man who had never been invited to a Scythian funeral, recorded their reaction with visible bewilderment. In his words, they howled with joy. Howled, not coughed, not meditated quietly. Howled. That is not a word you associate with restrained grief. Now, here is what connects all of these discoveries. The Utah hearth, the Pamir braziers, the Scythian felt tents. None of them involved a pipe. None of them involved rolling anything. None of them involved any device that you would look at and say, ah yes, a smoking instrument. They all used the same thing: fire, open fire, hot stones, plant material, smoke rising from burning matter into the air that people were already breathing. No technology required, no invention. Just a fire you were already sitting next to, and a plant that happened to be nearby. The first cigarette was not a cigarette. It was not even a pipe. It was a campfire. The same campfire you used to cook your food, to scare away predators, to keep your children warm at night. The most ordinary object in human existence doubled as the most ancient drug delivery system. The first smoke had no filter, it had stars above it. So why inhale at all? Ancient people could have chewed these plants. They could have brewed them, eaten them, rubbed them on their skin. Many did. But inhalation kept winning. And the reason is almost embarrassingly simple. Speed. Your lungs contain roughly 70 square meters of surface area, about the size of a tennis court, folded up inside your chest, like biological origami. When smoke-carrying nicotine or THC hits that surface, the molecules cross into your bloodstream almost immediately. From there, they reach your brain in somewhere between 7 and 20 seconds. 7 seconds, faster than an aspirin dissolves, faster than a shot of espresso kicks in, faster than you can read this paragraph out loud. Compare that to other delivery methods. Chewing tobacco works, but the nicotine absorbs through your gum lining, a much smaller, much slower surface. That takes minutes. Eating a cannabis edible, the compound has to survive your stomach acid, pass through your intestinal wall, get processed by your liver, and only then trickle into your bloodstream. 30 minutes to an hour minimum, inhaling. Seconds. The lungs are a direct highway to the central nervous system, and smoke is the vehicle that skips every red light. Ancient humans did not understand pharmacology. They had no concept of alkaloids, receptor binding, or bioavailability. But their bodies understood speed. You don't need to know why something works to know that it works. And it worked. But speed alone doesn't explain repetition. Lots of things happen fast. Getting stung by a wasp is fast. You don't T-line up for that twice. So why did humans keep coming back to smoke? Because speed was only the delivery method. What it delivered was a change in how they felt. Think about the daily reality of a human 12,000 years ago. Pain was constant, and not the metaphorical kind. Infected wounds that never healed right. Broken bones that fused at bad angles. Toothaches that lasted weeks with no dentist within 100,000-year radius. Fear was ambient. Not anxiety about your inbox. Actual, immediate fear. Predators that could outrun you. Rival groups that might raid your camp at night. Weather that could drop below freezing with no warning and no shelter worth the name. Fatigue was unrelenting. Sleep was shallow, fragile, interrupted by every sound in the dark. Food was never guaranteed. You ate when you found something. You went hungry when you didn't. That was the baseline. That was every single day. And then you sit beside a fire. Someone throws a handful of dried leaves onto the embers. Within seconds, the edges of all of that. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion, soften, not disappear. Just recede. Your muscles loosen. Your breathing slows. Your mind shifts into a state that is. And honestly, we don't have a better word for this. Different. The fire looks sharper. The sounds of the night seem farther away. Time stretches, just a little. The knot in your stomach unties itself by half a turn. Not drunk, not unconscious. Not euphoric in any way you'd write home about. If home existed yet, altered. And here's the thing about altered states that makes them dangerous in the most fundamental way. They don't need to be dramatic to be compelling. A subtle shift is enough. A 10% reduction in pain. A slight softening of dread. That is not a high. That is relief. And relief, in a world where relief barely existed, was probably the most powerful sensation a human being could experience. The first smoker didn't need to know the name of the molecule. He didn't need a pharmacist or a warning label or a peer-reviewed study. He only needed to remember the feeling. And memory, it turns out, is all addiction has ever required. But here is where this story becomes something more than just biology. Because ancient humans didn't smoke alone. Almost every piece of evidence we have, the wishbone hearth, the Jerzankal tombs, the Scythian tents, involves a group setting, a shared fire, a collective ritual. These weren't private habits. They were communal experiences. And that changes everything about how we should think about them. If you wanted to engineer a social bonding mechanism from scratch, you'd struggle to design anything better than a fire surrounded by psychoactive smoke. Think about it. Same physical space. Same altered mental state. Same time. Everyone sits in a circle. Everyone breathes the same air. Everyone shifts together. It is like ancient Bluetooth. Automatic pairing. No password required. In many indigenous American cultures, tobacco smoke was sacred, a carrier of prayers, a path between the living world and whatever comes after. Smoke rose, prayers rose with it. That wasn't metaphor to these cultures. That was mechanics. In the Scythian funeral rite, cannabis smoke wasn't recreational. It was how you said goodbye, how you purified yourself after touching the dead, how you stood at the boundary between this world and whatever came next and leaned across. And this wasn't limited to two cultures. Across Central Asia, across the Americas, across millennia, unconnected groups of humans independently arrived at the same conclusion. Burning a plant together and breathing its smoke was how you bonded, how you grieved, how you healed. A smoke circle was not a party, it was social glue. It was a church before churches existed, a pharmacy before pharmacies, a therapist's office before anyone had a word for therapy, all compressed into one rising cloud. We tend to talk about smoking as a personal vice, a failing of individual willpower. But what if the reality is exactly the opposite? What if smoking started not as a private act, but as a fundamentally communal one? Now we arrive at the part of this story that is, genuinely, the most unsettling. And it has nothing to do with culture or ritual. It has to do with the hardware inside your skull. Why do these plant molecules work on the human brain at all? Nicotine comes from tobacco. THC comes from cannabis. These are chemicals that plants evolved for their own survival, mostly as insecticides, designed to scramble the nervous systems of bugs trying to eat them. They were never designed for us. They were never meant for us. And yet, when nicotine enters your brain, it clicks into something called a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, a protein sitting on the surface of your neurons. Here is the critical detail. That receptor did not evolve for nicotine. It evolved hundreds of millions of years ago to respond to acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter your own brain produces naturally. Acetylcholine is involved in attention, memory, muscle movement, basic operating system functions. Nicotine just happens, by sheer molecular coincidence, to fit the same keyhole. It is like a skeleton key. It wasn't made for this door, but it turns the lock anyway. Same story with cannabis. Your body runs something called the endocannabinoid system, a signaling network that helps regulate mood, pain, appetite, memory. Scientists estimate this system evolved over 500 million years ago. 500 million. For context, that is before fish had jaws, before anything with legs existed on land. This system is in fish, in lizards, in birds, in every mammal that has ever lived. Cannabis, as a plant species, probably appeared somewhere between 28 and 34 million years ago. Do the math. The lock existed for roughly 470 million years before the key showed up. Your brain did not evolve for tobacco. Tobacco found a lock that was already there, and here is the part that should probably bother you more than it does. We never had a fighting chance. The receptors were ancient, the plants were patient, and when molecule finally met receptor, not by design, not by conspiracy, just by the blind arithmetic of evolution, the deal was done. Not by choice. Not by weakness, by chemistry that predates the dinosaurs. And, uncomfortable footnote, we may not be the only ones. Across the animal kingdom, there are scattered reports of species that appear to seek out intoxicating substances. Birds eating fermented fruit and stumbling as if drunk. Primates returning to the same fermenting trees again and again. The evidence is uneven, and reading motivation into animal behavior is always risky. But the pattern shows up in enough species to make you wonder. Humans may not be the only animals drawn toward altered states. We are just the ones who built rituals, markets, and warning labels around them. And that, right there, is where this story turns dark. Because everything we've talked about, the campfire, the hearth, the brazier, the felt tent, all of it was low frequency, occasional, wrapped in ritual, ceremony, community. You did not smoke alone at your desk on a Tuesday afternoon. You smoked with your group after a death, before a hunt, during a ceremony that happened a handful of times a year. The habit was ancient, but it was also slow. And then the machine arrived. Tobacco was domesticated, probably somewhere in the Americas, within the last 5,000 years. Agriculture scaled production. Spanish and Portuguese traders carried it across the Atlantic. By the 1600s, tobacco was a global commodity. By the 1800s, it was an industry. And then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the cigarette was industrialized, engineered, not just to deliver nicotine, but to deliver it as fast, as frequently, and as addictively as possible. Filters that weren't really filters. chemical additives that boosted absorption, ventilation holes calculated to increase puff count, flavoring designed to make the first cigarette bearable for a 14-year-old, marketing that targeted children, soldiers, women, anyone who hadn't started yet. The tobacco industry did to smoking what fast food did to cooking. Took a slow, communal, seasonal behavior and made it portable, private, compulsive, and deadly. Today, there are roughly 1.3 billion tobacco users on Earth. Tobacco kills more than 8 million of them every year, more than malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis combined. In the 20th century alone, it killed an estimated 100 million people. 100 million. And here is the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. The habit is not the problem. The habit is ancient, possibly older than language, almost certainly older than any moral system that has ever tried to judge it. What kills people is not the human craving for altered states. That craving may be as old as consciousness itself. What kills people is the machine that learned to exploit that craving at industrial scale. The habit is ancient. The machine is modern. We put the smoker on trial. But the defendant is older than every courtroom that has ever existed, older than every law, every scripture, every public health campaign. We judge a behavior that was ancient before judgment was invented. Right now, this exact moment. You are doing something that would look very familiar to a human being sitting beside a fire 12,000 years ago. You are staring into a glowing light. You are sitting still, and you are waiting, probably without realizing it, for the next small thing that makes you feel something. The substances change, the rituals change, the technology changes, but the craving for something, anything, that shifts how you feel, even slightly, even briefly. That is the oldest human impulse we have evidence for. Older than the wheel, older than agriculture, possibly older than art. You didn't choose this. Not entirely. Your receptors were waiting for something to fit the lock. For 500 million years, they waited. And when the first wisp of smoke curled off a burning plant and drifted into the lungs of some unnamed ancestor who was just trying to stay warm, the lock clicked. It is never fully closed. You changed the fire, but you are still sitting beside it.